Hello children, welcome to our science session. Let's continue our chapter reproduction in animals. Before we continue our chapter, let's have a quick recap of the chapter, whatever we have learned in the last session. In last session, we have learned about development of embryo. That is, fertilization results in the formation of zygote, which begins to develop into an embryo. You can see in first figure A1, and zygote divides repeatedly to give rise to ball of cells, that is figure B. You can see the ball of cells. Then cells begin to form groups of cells together. It develop into tissues, and tissues group together to form organs of the body. This developing structure, what we call that as an embryo. Then the embryo gets embedded in the wall of the uterus for further development. Here you can see wall of the uterus. This embryo, that is group of cells which for growing, developing embryo, it get embedded in the wall of the uterus for further development. And then the embryo continues to grow, develop in the uterus. Then it gradually develops different parts, or you can tell different organs such as hands, legs, head, eyes, ears, etc. This stage of embryo, where all the body parts can be fully developed, what we call that as fetus. So godchildren, what is the difference between embryo and fetus? Embryo fully developed into fetus. Fetus means where all the organs like head, ears, eyes, etc. are got fully developed. Then when the development of the fetus is complete, then the mother gives birth to baby. Then we have learned about how that internal fertilization takes place in hens. That is the same way as that of in humans. Soon after fertilization, the zygote divides repeatedly and travels down the oviduct. As it travels down, that time it develops many protective layers around it. That what we call that as hard shell. Hard shell, what we see in hen's egg, is the protective layer. After the hard shell is formed around the developing embryo, hen finally lays the egg. Then about 3 weeks, the embryo got fully developed. It turns into chick. Then we might have seen that hen sitting on the eggs, that is hatching out, isn't it? To provide sufficient warmth, the chick hatch out from the eggshell. And the same way, the animals which undergo external fertilization, the further development of embryo takes place outside the female body. The embryo continues to grow with their egg coverings. After the embryo, it is the egg hatches, isn't it? We may see numerous tadpoles swimming in ponds and streams. So on the basis of this, we have classified animals into two types: viviparous animals and oviparous animals. Then what are viviparous animals? The animals which directly give birth to young ones are called as viviparous animals. And what are oviparous animals? Animals which lay eggs and from the young ones hatch out from the eggs are called as oviparous animals. Then we have learned about the difference between zygote and embryo. What is zygote? It is consists of a single cell. Then embryo, it consists of group of cells, isn't it? And then zygote is formed as the fertilization process. Then embryo is formed after the fertilization process. Then zygote has no well-defined organs or tissues. Embryo, the body parts and tissues, that is organs and tissues, are well-defined in an embryo. The same way, we have learned about differences between viviparous animals and oviparous animals. Viviparous animals are organisms that give birth to young ones directly. Oviparous animals are organisms that reproduce by laying eggs. Examples for viviparous animals, we have learned human beings, dogs, cows, cats, etc. Oviparous animals examples are fishes, all reptiles and amphibians. Now, how we will continue our chapter, how young ones develop into adults. As the new individuals which are born or hatched from the eggs, they continue to grow till they are fully developed. Isn't it? In some animals, we may see that young ones may look very different from the adults. If you recall the life cycle of silkworm, what we have learned in standard 7, life cycle of silkworm, the life cycle of silk moth, that is adult moth, it starts, that is, it lays, female silk moth lay eggs. Then female moth lay many tiny eggs on the mulberry leaves, isn't it? Then the caterpillar or larva hatch out from the eggs of silk moth. So eggs hatch out, what it develops into larva, isn't it? Larva hatch out from the eggs of silk moth. Then the silkworm, that larva, feeds continuously on the mulberry leaves and it gives rise to pupa. So in the pupa stage, we have learned that it weaves a silk thread around itself, isn't it? And after that, it swings its head and spinning a fiber, that it produces a fiber made up of protein, and that what we call that as silk fiber. Then it forms a protective layer around the pupa, and this covering the what we call that as cocoon. Then the silk thread is obtained from silk moth cocoon. This way, the life cycle of silkworm, if you can see in the figure, it is explained in a detailed manner. That is, adult moth, it lays eggs on the mulberry leaves, then eggs hatch into larvae, then caterpillar, this it feed on the mulberry leaves about 3 to 4 weeks, and each of the caterpillars spin fiber around itself, what we call that as cocoon. Then inside the cocoon, the caterpillar changes into pupa, and then pupa develop into adult, and then it breaks open the shell cocoon and then comes out as the adult. And the same way, this what we call the procedure, what we call that as metamorphosis, the process. The metamorphosis is a biological process of transforming larva into adult. And this sudden or abrupt changes in animal structure, what we call that as metamorphosis. This can be seen in frogs, insects, etc., which shows metamorphosis. And if you see the life cycle of frog, we can see 3 distinct stages, namely egg, tadpole, and adult. And if you see the life cycle of frog, here the tadpole emerges out from the egg. That is, female, we have learned that female frog, it lays hundreds of eggs, isn't it? And then male releases millions of sperms, and it results when the egg and sperm unite, it results during the process of fertilization, it results into zygote, isn't it? And then this the tadpole that emerges out from the egg, that fertilized egg, it contains gills, tail, and a small circular mouth. It looks like a fish, isn't it? They can swim easily, freely in water. Then the tadpole grows and it undergoes abrupt changes. Abrupt means entirely it changed in its structure and develops into mature frog. The tadpole's metamorphosis begins with the development of limbs, lung development, and finally the tail is being absorbed by the body. Tail, it loses its tail. So this abrupt changes, if you compare tadpole and adult frog, entirely different, isn't it? Tadpole, it consists of gill, tail, and small circular mouth. Whereas when a tadpole undergoes metamorphosis, it changes, it loses gills, develop into lungs, and its tail gets absorbed into the body, and it develops long limbs. So this way, the abrupt changes, what we call that as metamorphosis. And so if you, from this what we understood, the life cycle of silkworm includes 4 stages, that is egg, larva, or we can call that as caterpillar. That larva develop into pupa, then pupa into adult. The different stages of frog, it starts from egg to adult stage. That is we can see 3 distinct stages in the development of frog. That is egg, tadpole. Here tadpole, what we call that as larva, and then into adult. A tadpole looks so different from the adults. Similarly, the caterpillar or larva of silkworm or pupa of silkworm also looks entirely different from the adult moth. So the features that are present in the adult are not found in these young ones like caterpillar or tadpole. So we must have seen that beautiful moth emerging out from the cocoon. The same way in case of frog, the tadpoles, they transform into adults capable of jumping and swimming. So the transformation of larva into adult through this drastic changes is called as metamorphosis. So if you, the same way, what about the changes that we observe in our body as we grow? Do we have any abrupt changes in our body? Do you think we too undergo metamorphosis? No. In human beings, the body parts are similar to those present in the adults, or present from the time of birth itself. We don't have any new organs, or we don't that young ones and adult, if you compare, it is all the organs are similar. So in human beings, metamorphosis do not occur for children. So in this session, so we can come to the end of the chapter. And in this session, we have learned about fertilization that takes place outside the female body is called external fertilization. External fertilization is observed in frogs, fish, etc. And then zygote divides repeatedly and to give rise to an embryo. The embryo gets embedded in the wall of the uterus for further development. The stage of the embryo in which all body parts are identifiable is called as fetus. Then animals such as human beings, cows and dogs, which give birth to young ones, they are called as viviparous animals. And animals such as hen, frogs, lizard, butterfly, etc., which lay eggs and young ones hatch out from that egg are called oviparous animals. Then finally, we have learned that the transformation of larva into adult through drastic changes is called as metamorphosis.